So, what am I going to talk about today? I only decided today. I decided I'd give a series of talks on the 6 paramitas. And today will be generosity. Some of you are already familiar with this book, The Jewel Ornament of Liberation. It was Gampopa, one of the main disciples of Milarepa, who put these teachings together into what is called a lamrim, as kind of stages of the path, drawing from all the sutras, Mahayana sutras, and drawing the teachings together into one place, so you've got a structure for the whole path, because the sutras are so, when they came to Tibet, there's just all these scriptures arrived, and bewildering massive scriptures, what to do with them. And Gampopa started this tradition of creating a lamrim, or a set of teachings that would take you from the beginning right through the path to the give you a road map and sort of finger pointing all the way along the path. So it's a good reference. When I thought of talking about generosity, I thought, right, Gampopa. Let's see what he has to say on that. I thought it was very fitting because last time I was talking about rebirth and karma, and whether as a Buddhist you had to believe in that or not. And so then I was referring to past and future lives and different places that you might be reborn in samsara, as it were. And when I picked up Gampopa, this was the first thing that jumped out of the page at me was, well, if you want to have, wealth and resources in future lives, well, you better practice generosity. Well, yeah, that's not where I would have started, basically, because, of course, as Westerners, we're not particularly convinced that there are past and future lives. So if that's the reason for practicing generosity, it might fall a bit flat. But actually, we have reasons to practice generosity of our own, because we notice, actually, when we practice generosity, we feel better immediately. So I thought it was worth having a look to see, well, what's that about? So I'll come on to that in a moment. The other thing that I was thinking about was that just this last week we began the first course of online mentor training, and that was the preliminary to that was an introductory course into awakening dialogue. And this is all about talking to each other in a meaningful way about Dharma, which means listening to each other and really being open to each other and sharing Dharma with each other. And this relates directly to generosity, because Gampopa makes this point that yes, there's material generosity. There's the generosity of providing people with safety, which is quite interesting. A lot of emphasis is put on that, making people feel safe, protecting their life, protecting life generally. And the third one is to give Dharma. And of these 3 kinds of generosity, the one that's most beneficial to others is giving Dharma, because this protects not just in this life, but in all future lives too. so that this is the greatest of gifts. So I thought it was really an important theme as we embark on this training to be mentors for each other and help to communicate with each other and help each other on the path, that we really appreciate that this is practicing generosity of the highest kind. Because I think there's something about thinking of it in that way that's important. I was also thinking about it because, as you know, in our Sangha, our approach is through the principles of discovering the heart of Buddhism, and the heart and heart wish and openness, clarity, sensitivity, and Mandala principle, and then going on into trusting the heart of Buddhism, and then going on into the different areas of living the awakened heart, the love and compassion and insight and daily life practice, and then the vasta vision and the pranidhanas and the connections. And it almost, you could think, well, that's kind of a different approach to talking about the 6 paramitas. And I want to make the point that it's actually spot on. It's talking about generosity from beginning to end. And especially I wanted to make the point that I know people lead very full lives, very busy lives, lots of commitments, and finding how difficult to fit in some time to meditate and some time to study and reflect on Dharma. And then there's a tendency for us to say, oh dear, I don't have time to practice Dharma, I don't have time to practice, I'm getting older and I haven't done anything and I haven't time to practice, oh dear. I think it's really, really important to remember the 6 paramitas, because there isn't an occasion on which you can't be practicing completely, fully Dharma in terms of practicing the 6 paramitas, practicing generosity. It doesn't matter what you're doing, where you are, what's going on. It's an opportunity to practice generosity. It's an opportunity to practice Shila, usually translated as discipline. It's an opportunity to practice Kshanti, which is usually translated as patience or forbearance. And from those 3 arise the next 3, which are the energy or enthusiasm or whatever you want to call that one, virya, and the samadhi or dhyana, the meditation or the... If you think of meditation simply as sitting in sitting still in the meditation posture, then of course often you could argue you haven't got time to stop and do that, although it's questionable. If you count just 5 minutes or 3 or even just 1 minute, that it's difficult to honestly say you haven't got time for that, but for longer periods of time, yes, it might be true. But actually meditation isn't exactly sitting still in a meditation posture. Meditation is bhavana, it's kind of course jhana, but that's when you can naturally remain in a state of meditation and focused and concentrated. But you can practice the bhavana, the becoming accustomed to the view, at any time. The only thing that stops us is distraction. The only thing. That's basically it, but it's good to remember that. And then from the reflection on the view arises the realization of the view, which is the prajna of realizing, you could say realizing emptiness. And you might think, so that's really the ultimate, to practice emptiness or to realize emptiness. Actually, it's not exactly true, because when you've realized emptiness, that's it. There's nothing more to do. So actually now you can really practice generosity. So it's like generosity sounds like the first, but in actual fact it's the forever. It doesn't ever come to an end. That's the expression of your true nature. Once you've realized emptiness, then you're now in a position to really practice generosity. Complete and perfect and pure generosity, limitless generosity. This is the Bodhisattva path. That's quite mysterious, isn't it? It's quite mysterious because emptiness sounds as if we're moving towards more rarefied states of being, whereas generosity sounds like really down-to-earth dealing with what needs to be done here and now. Actually, to really be down-to-earth and be working really effectively with the here and now requires this realization of emptiness. So it's almost like counterintuitive when we start out. I really wanted to make that point. And also Gampopa makes that point very strongly. So I said I'd come back to something and I can't remember what it was. So I'll just carry on. Particularly I wanted to talk about, what we call Dharma practice. We might have a very narrow view of what Dharma practice is. And I want to make sure you have a much broader view, and perhaps you could say even a more generous view of what is Dharma practice. So when you determine to spend your whole time practicing Dharma, you really mean it. And it's not just a matter of listening, reflecting and meditating, which of course is the way we really deepen our practice. But that doesn't mean that when we're not actively engaged in that we're not practicing. Or you could argue whenever we're practicing some kind of meditation, in the sense of we're making the Dharma come alive in our, or to really make it real, as it were, in our life and in our being. So in this Sangha we emphasize transmission, we emphasize spiral learning, and we emphasize awakened dialogue. These are things that we engage in as a Sangha and we try to make happen as a Sangha. When we talk about generosity, it's in those terms. The generosity of the teacher, creating a situation where we are able to practice our generosity of being present and open, allowing ourselves to be influenced by the teaching. And that whole situation then is an act of generosity for the whole world, because it means the Dharma is being transmitted in this world at this time, which is actually having a very powerful effect that isn't always immediately obvious to us. And the way that we go about learning about how to practice generosity goes deeper as we spiral around the different aspects of the Dharma, which reveal to us more and more aspects of what it's about. And then in our interactions with each other, talking about the Dharma with each other, wondering about the Dharma with each other, we're actually practicing the generosity of sharing the Dharma, which is of the greatest benefit. You can't think of anything that's of greater benefit, really, either for ourselves or for others, either for this life or future lives. It's something quite wonderful. So I feel very grateful to you for making this teaching situation possible, everybody who's contributed in whatever way they have. And it is a kind of giving. Listening to the Dharma is a kind of giving. It's very important when you come and listen to the Dharma what your motive is, really. I mean, of course, you've already given up your time, you've given up your energy, you've given up, in a sense, you've generously created a space in your life to receive these teachings. Maybe you haven't thought of it that way. Maybe you thought you came to get something. But it works like that, doesn't it? When you give, you receive, always. And if you can't give, well, it's very difficult to receive. And that's where Gampopa starts, really. He starts by saying, well, if you're stingy, if you're mean, small-minded, you're not willing to give anything, what's the karmic result of that? You get born impoverished. You get born where, if you can't actually give your time and energy to listen to the Dharma, then you'll be born somewhere where you won't even have the opportunity to hear it. So it's kind of like, it's not a very nice thing to think about that. I don't practice generosity because I'm thinking like that. But maybe it's worth pondering anyway. So how do we end up finding ourselves in a way being pulled away from the Dharma or not having the opportunity to practice Dharma? How does that happen? And maybe it is because we haven't approached the Dharma with enough sense of gratitude and generosity. We haven't valued it enough. It happens like that in our life now, doesn't it? If we don't give it any value, then we never find time to do anything. If we never have time to reflect on it, then it more and more goes into the background and our time gets taken over by other things. If that works in this life, there isn't any particular reason to think it doesn't happen in the long term as well. There's always this tremendous emphasis on giving in all the customs associated with receiving Dharma teachings. We create a place where the Buddha is invoked and something is given. These offering bowls are put out every morning by the stupa and here, and everybody on their own shrines. It's like the first thing you do in the morning almost is like to give, to express giving. And I was thinking to myself about what that really means in terms of generosity, and what we normally mean by generosity. You think, well, I'm not sure that's what we would call generosity, generally speaking. That's quite interesting, isn't it? I was going through the different principles of the discovering the heart of Buddhism in terms of these kind of customs of offering to the shrine, or offering our food at meal times, and then offering at the end of every practice, dedicating the punya, giving, making that kind of offering. And I was thinking about the word generosity, which to me is slightly, it has a richer feel to it than giving, actually. Generosity of spirit, at a kind of I think it does suggest openness. That's very open, spacious kind of attitude to everything, even in the way one thinks about other people. I remember in India once, I went to one of these Indian gurus who was a female guru, and somebody asked her what was generosity, and she said something like thinking the best of another person and seeing their good qualities. Something unexpected like that, but it does fit very well with generosity, doesn't it? If somebody's very generous in the way they approach other people or situations, they think the best of people, they expect the best of people, they tend to interpret their behaviour in a very kind way or an understanding way. Very, very generous attitude, sort of. I think it's very significant. Generous. That was an interesting answer to her question as well, I thought. So it's got that open, spacious quality to it. If a person's generous, you feel at ease in their presence because they're not likely to be judgmental and yeah. And then it also implies clarity and awareness. Like if someone's generous, you get the sense that they're very aware of what's going on around them. Very clear about a situation, what's needed and what they don't need themselves, so have available to give. It also has an implication of good judgment, I think. She's very generous, rather than somehow giving, but in a way that perhaps you're a bit dubious about whether that's actually going to be very helpful or very sensible. And just think, well, it's a bit extreme, or it's a bit, it's not very sensible. I don't know, for me, if I'm calling someone generous, it's because I have a lot of respect for how they're giving. And it's well judged. And then I also think of, with me, when I think of generosity, I think of, yes, I would call it generosity if someone's being very sensitive and responsive and genuine and giving from their heart and really connecting in a good way rather than, the Lady Bountiful type of giving. That's sort of very giving, but at the same time you sort of think, oh wow, kind of a bit kind of over the top. Whereas if someone's generous, somehow I associate that with being sensitive. And also what's interesting is when I actually start to think myself about, wanting to be generous, I think to myself, well, I get myself tied in knots actually. And that's all to do with Mandala principle. It's all to do with hierarchy within the Mandala as to prioritizing and giving in an appropriate way. It's like the mandala has a structure, your own personal mandala has a structure, and there are those people who are close to you, who you're responsible for, and then there's people who are perhaps in great need that you feel really drawn to give to. And then there's all sorts of people in between who you could give to, perhaps, but then you wouldn't be able to give to the others if you gave to them the same as you gave to the people close to you, and blah, blah, blah. And it's really interesting because Gampopa talks about this quite early on, saying, well, who you give to does matter. You need to consider who to give to. And perhaps what we wouldn't perhaps expect, first you give to those people who have, or you give to what has spiritual qualities that are conducive to enlightenment. I guess there you'd think, well, yeah, I can see that the Guru or the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha are the most valuable thing. I can see that, but they're not the most in need. I think this is very much a Western way of thinking, that they don't actually need my gold and silver and jewels and flowers and cakes and money or whatever, because, they've got enough. And that's a sort of, I'm a Westerner myself, and generosity doesn't immediately take me to think of giving in that way, but it does take me to thinking of those people who are my dependents. And so Gampopa then talks about, looking after your dependents, and that's really important. And looking after those who have helped you, returning kindness for kindness, especially to your parents and family and so on, so that they have priority. They are your special responsibility. And then he mentions then those people who are suffering, that they're special because they're suffering, and if you can help them too, then that's really good. So he's talking about it in those terms, and I'm thinking about it in our terms. What do we do with our wealth, as it were? How do we make those decisions about how to share it, how to give it? How much do you give to the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and why? And I think the reason we as Westerners find that not so obvious is because we also don't think of past and future lives and karma, cause and effect as being obvious. So traditionally the idea would be, well, you give to the Buddha, even to a Buddha image or a stupa, so that it can almost sometimes become an embarrassment that the stupa has its own treasures that have to be kept with it because they've been given for it. This is a problem in India some of the time. All the wealth was given to the stupas. But the idea there is that there's some deeper connection beyond the physical one. So that when you're giving with the intention of giving to the Buddha or the stupa or to some sacred place or person or thing even, it could be a book or a text or something like that. The idea is that actually affects the universe, that this has been received and has produced the corresponding energetic exchange, if you like, with that mandala of that text or that image or that place or person. And that then is something that will carry on reverberating and having an effect that will then benefit ourselves and benefit the world and benefit other people and keep the Dharma alive in the world, bring good fortune and happiness in all sorts of unspecified ways. So if you think like that, then obviously there's a reason for making offerings to holy things, you could say, which is, a lot of societies and a lot of customs worldwide are built around this principle of there being something going on that's not actually working on the physical level. It's working at a deeper level. That's kind of not so obvious to us as Westerners, I think. So I think it's more a tendency to think, well, if I'd like to support the teacher, how much does the teacher need? That would be more the sort of way we'd look at things. I think I do to myself, to be honest. What sort of projects is the teacher doing that I could support? It's much more a Western way of thinking, isn't it? But I think it still works in the sense that we are giving to the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha in that way, and therefore it will work for us, even though we're not particularly thinking of it in those terms. I hope so, anyway. But lots of questions arise there between the interface then between Western practitioners and Sanghas and Eastern practitioners and Sanghas, and the difference between the way they approach things, and who knows whether there's any difference or one is better than the other. It's hard to tell. I noticed when Gampopa's talking about giving the Dharma, he tells you how to give the Dharma, and tells you to spruce up, clean up, look tidy, do my best. And then you need a throne, and drape it with silk and make a very special place. And of course, that's not always an obvious way for Westerners to go about receiving Dharma teachings. It might actually create a sense of alienation or a sense of somehow exoticism or something not quite in line with what might be a more fruitful way of relating to a Dharma teacher. So, of course, in Tibetan culture and in the East generally, when somebody's giving Dharma teaching, then it's traditional to come in and to make, prostrations, and which you've probably seen that on. If you haven't seen it personally, you've probably seen it on films and things where there's a lot of bowing going on and prostrating going on and formalities going on. So it's good to understand that the thinking behind that is not this sense of, I'm so worthless, as here's an opportunity for me to make this kind of connection that's going to be beneficial for myself and others in all future lives. Sort of, oh, come on, go on your throne so I can bow at you. And they do compete with each other, actually, to be the one that does the bowing. If the High Lamas meet each other, they start wrestling to see who can get the lowest quickest and be the one that does the biggest bow. It's quite sweet, really. But it's interesting. It's all related somehow, isn't it, to Mandala principle and what different actions mean within a certain mandala. So within that kind of mandala, that has that kind of meaning, and in our own kind of mandala, we're discovering what has real meaning and what hasn't. And I think this mentoring course that we're now devising is going to be exploring in some detail really how we best communicate Dharma with each other, and can we maintain that same sense of the specialness of the occasion, the specialness of the person that is there sharing Dharma with you and what they really represent, and the positive exchange will be generating a power that we could actually then appreciate and dedicate for the purpose of bringing all beings to enlightenment. Let's go as far as we can. Let's not leave any beings out, so it's all, and not stopping halfway. Enlightenment beyond all suffering. So, we're taking all beings to complete and perfect enlightenment and nothing less. So whatever we do is contributing to that one universal project of the universe, really, which is bringing all beings to enlightenment. So the whole thing becomes generosity, actually. Whatever it is we're doing. And I think sometimes because of the way things are in the West now, where people are receiving teaching online. Hi there, I didn't say hello. And you can visit different websites and get different teachings at the, press of a button. And you can flick from one to the other, and you can be doing something else at the same time as you're vaguely watching it, and so on. You wouldn't do that, would you? We wouldn't do that, would we? But it's possible. And maybe we're missing something. Like when you make a big effort to come here, you have to really plan it ahead of time. You have to think about it. You have to really give up your time, give up a lot of, give up whatever else you would have done. Make that effort, take that journey, arrive, meet people, exchange, and settle down in the presence of the teacher. You are actually actively creating the situation by being there. You're not simply just hanging on the edge, waiting for someone else to do it. You're the ones doing it. And there's something, all the connections that are implicit in that, I say implicit, I mean they are there in that situation, will have an impact, if you like, on the universe, on reality itself. It's not just accidental. Something will come from that whole amount of energy that goes into coming together and meeting face to face, exchanging face to face. All of that will have a further impact on ourselves and on the world in general. So it's obvious then that you're going to dedicate that. But even if you are at a distance, you can put in more or less effort into making that a special occasion. And if you make it a special occasion and you treat it with a lot of respect and you really think of yourself as actually participating in the whole situation, and you're communicating in some way, because maybe your picture's there and you're, we're saying hello or something. Somehow you're being acknowledged there, and those connections are still being made. So I think a lot is possible, actually, through using modern technology, as long as we're not getting sloppy from our side. As long as we're using that interface, as it were, in a wholehearted way. So I'm beginning to really appreciate the possibilities that modern technologies are opening up for building sanghas, especially in the West, where the people who want to build them are sort of few and far between. And therefore, if you can link over a distance, it means more people have the opportunity to connect. When we've got so many Dharma practitioners all over the country that everybody can meet locally, that would be great, wouldn't it? But in the meantime, we can meet this way. Where was I going?
Giving us an opportunity to make connections.
Yes. I was going somewhere. Right.
Mandala principle.
I was talking about Mandala principle, wasn't I? That was probably the main thing I was talking about there. The reality of the connections we make through our acts of generosity. So from one point of view, you can think of, well, generosity is good because it's not stingy, it's being able to let go, it's being able to give. So then, you're opening and therefore you're able to receive. But generosity is also about this connections, and that's what these offerings on the shrine and the meal offerings and even the dedication is actually largely about. And that's why it makes sense to make them even though they don't need anything. So we offer our food at a mealtime even though you could say, well, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas don't need it. But that isn't the point, and that's why I wrote that verse in the beginning bit, in order to strengthen our connection with you. That every exchange we make with the Buddha, or the enlightened mind, if you like, the heart of awakening, is every connection we make with it strengthens the power of our connection. There's a real energy exchange happens at a level beyond just the physical level. In a mysterious way, you could say, almost. How could it be? How could a connection happen through how could it happen through space and time? How could it happen if it isn't through space and time? So when we started off with singing to Milarepa, it was singing to Milarepa, please rise up now within my heart. Now. Milarepa, now. He said, well, Milarepa was ages ago. But if he's enlightened, he's out of time. He's not in time. So he's as available now and here as anywhere. It's just a matter of whether we're convinced or not. If we're not convinced, he's there, but we're kind of, what it's like when somebody's ignoring you. You're there, but someone's ignoring you. Well, okay, but you're still there. So that sense of the act of generosity towards the Buddha being received by the Buddha as, if you like, other. And I often quote or refer you to the story of Vadra the magician at this point. Are you all familiar with that story? It's in, there's a book, a collection of sutras, a collection of the Ratnakuta, not all of them, but a number of the Ratnakuta collection of sutras called Treasury of Mahayana Sutras, edited by Garma C.C. Chung, and I think it's the first one is Vadra the Magician. And Vadra, there is a version of this in the Theravadan, in the Pali, which is a toned down version of the Mahayana one, where Vadra is a magician who gets jealous of the Buddha because the Buddha's getting more followers than he has. He's thinking, well, how can I make the Buddha a laughing stock? That seemed to be the way people thought in those days. So he tried to magically produce a feast offering for the Buddha, because that's, this same principle of making this good connection and receiving this the blessing of the Buddha by offering a feast. But his idea was he'd do it on a rubbish tip, so that at the key moment when the Buddha's just about to take the food, the magical display disappears and the Buddha's sitting on the rubbish heap eating the rubbish, you see. Ha ha ha. Wouldn't that be funny? And that would show the Buddha didn't know what he was doing, because he was tricked by such a simple trick. Schoolboy humour, yeah. Anyway, what happens is that Vadra creates this magical feast, and then as soon as he created it, then the gods all come and say, can we join in? Can we also make offerings at this feast? Because they have this same idea, to make lots of connections and auspicious connections in order to receive the blessing of the Buddha. So they make this amazing display, and Vadra sort of feels his little display looks a bit silly now. So he thinks he'll withdraw it, you see. So he tries to withdraw his magical illusion, and he can't. He can't remove it. He's stuck with it. So anyway, the next day the Buddha comes, and Vadra has to kind of, live with the embarrassment of it all. But then he repents in front of the Buddha and says, that he really shouldn't have done that, and he's sorry, and he becomes a good disciple. And he does ask the Buddha, he says, but what I don't understand is, why could I not withdraw my magical illusion? Normally I can withdraw it. Once I make it, then I withdraw it. Why couldn't I? And then I love this bit. And the Buddha said, well, when you offer something to the Buddha, you can't have it back. So I think of all those half-eaten sandwiches that I suddenly remember to offer to the Buddha when I halfway through. I think, there they all are. That's evidence I remembered halfway through my sandwich. But through the grace of the Buddha, I'm sure it's all transformed into something very beautiful and wonderful. But, I do think that sometimes when I'm not very attentive or I'm not very convinced, I think, but the Buddha is. The Buddha will receive this. He will receive it and he'll make the most of it. I say he, I mean Buddha in principle, enlightened beings. Any slight movement we make towards them, they will take advantage of. They're just waiting for us to make the slightest move they can take advantage of to hook us. So I like to think of that when I'm feeling that something has not been quite good enough or a bit inadequate, I think, but the Buddha will have taken it anyway. And there's something very satisfying about having a gift received. I always think that. I'm always very grateful when people will accept gifts from me. Thank you. Thank you for receiving that. And it's really not nice, is it, if you give something and the person doesn't receive it. Even if they give it back afterwards, at least there's that sense that of giving, which you get in children, don't you? It's quite interesting when you watch children. It's one of the first ways they start to communicate, isn't it? They sort of pick things up and take them around and give them to people. And then watch to see, was it received? Okay, it was. Okay, I'll have it back. And then we give it again. They do, don't they? And that's a real sense of something very fundamental in that movement, I think. It's a fundamental movement of our awareness, wanting to do that. So I really wanted to make that point of some of this giving that seems to be routine and maybe just words or maybe just sentiment. I don't think it is. I think it's real. And when we, at the end of our practice, we think of what we've done. You know, if we've been listening to Dharma, or if we've just had a meal, or we've just done our prayers, or even it could be watching something on the, something online, or having a Dharma conversation, or walking on the stupa, or just doing some mindful walking or mindful sitting or anything. From time to time you can think, and this too is dedicated for the enlightenment of all beings. By the blessing of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, it will contribute to the enlightenment of all beings. Somehow, so that everything you're doing all the time is part of the same project. It's all Dharma practice. At any moment, at any time, in any circumstances, you can be giving. And I think I particularly wanted to emphasize the giving of our own, I don't know, do you call it our attention, our presence, our time, our empathy? Maybe it's all the same. When we're really present for another person in some way. Even if we're not in their presence, we can still be present for them, can't we? If you think of somebody who's ill or in trouble, and you spend some time simply being aware of them and maybe making some Dharma connection on their behalf, making some pranidhana on their behalf, or just simply being with them in your heart. This is something that I notice is still very current in our world, like even on the news, even on the BBC News, you can say with all seriousness, our hearts go out to them, or they're with our hearts, we're keeping them in our hearts. Even you can even say it still today, which is tremendously profound, and it's very heartening that we can still say it. And it's okay, it's not, it's a mysterious thing to say, really, isn't it? But it does mean a lot. It does mean a lot more than we perhaps even realise. And again, this comes back to the awakening dialogue. That's really being present and attentive and listening, which does require that we are present with ourselves and attentive and listening to ourselves as well. We listen better when we're listening to ourselves as well. The other person can feel the empathy more if we're listening, if we've got empathy for ourselves. Which, maybe that's just another way of talking about openness, and clarity, sensitivity, Mandala principle, heart wish, heart. And even maybe it's another way of talking about confidence, isn't it? Because what stops us from being present? More often not is fear, isn't it? More often than not it's fear. Some sort of anxiousness or worry or fear. And what is fear, actually, when you think about it? What is fear? Fundamentally, it's absence of confidence, isn't it? Can't quite relax into just being present. in a very relaxed way of, oh, okay, here I am, this is it. But it's interesting, isn't it? Here I am. It's really, really important that you are there. Your presence is there. And this is the root of generosity. We tend to think of, well, generosity is about being unselfish. So obviously self is a bad thing. Self gets in the way. While clinging and grasping and feeling inadequate and wanting something gets in the way. But actually, I am here. Really, I am here. I'm completely here. Is what it's about, isn't it? Because if just you not being there was enough, then you might as well not be there. But your being there is really important because you are there in a very special way. Every single one of us has that being there-ness, if you like. And that's important and mysterious, actually. Extremely mysterious. Because when you do your, meditation on emptiness and you explore looking for the self, what do you find? Do you find it in the body? Do you find it in the feelings? Everything's changing? Everything's on the move? Everything's nothing at all, really? So yeah, that's emptiness for you. And when you fully realise that, do you just then disappear and go out like a light? Poof. Are you now able to truly practice generosity? And this is in Gampopa's layout. Talks about different kinds of generosity, different ways of practicing generosity, different situations, different recipients of generosity. And then he talks about limitless generosity and how it becomes limitless. Increase. How do you increase the power of your generosity? Even if it's a very small gift. The 3 ways, I think. First is jnana, primordial wisdom as they call it. And this is a very simple method for increasing the power of your generosity. I'm laughing. Because it's actually to give free from the Mandala. The mandala, the triple mandala, the mandala of the giver, the mandala of the gift that's given, and the mandala of the one given to. So how can you be free from that? It wouldn't be generosity if there weren't a giver, a gift, and a given to. So how can it be free from this 3 mandalas? It's free from grasping at them as separate. And this is coming back to a point I've been making during the Trusting the Heart of Buddhism course. Distinct, but not separate. That's tremendously profound. You have to really realise the nature of emptiness to make any sense of that. The way it's explained in the short form in Gampopa is that you recognise that the one giving is illusion, and the gift is illusion, and the given to is illusion. Which doesn't really sound very interesting. It's sort of like, okay, so does it matter then if it's just illusion? But I think you have to think of illusion here being used in the sense of the magical illusion, like Vadra's illusion, that he actually conjured up something that could have an effect, that the Buddha could have received that. And the Buddha in fact did receive it and used it to advantage. So the illusion is actually a magical illusion that has some kind of, the word we've been using is like, it's an emanatory reality. It's actually a reality of some kind that is mysterious because it depends on the one looking at it what it is. So this is getting right down to something quite profound about the way anything appears anyway, because we're quite familiar with the idea that something is, everybody's perception of something is different, but we're not familiar with the idea that the something that we're all seeing different is somehow kind of is empty, but is still whatever it is. You could say something, but then that seems, oh, well, it's a thing. Well, it is, whatever it is. This is a key point of Dharma, actually. How is that? How is that empty? And what's the nature of that emptiness? And we recite every morning the Heart Sutra: form is emptiness, feeling is emptiness, the perception is emptiness, formations is emptiness, consciousness is emptiness. But they don't merge. It doesn't say that it does say afterwards, well, there's no I, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, but it's kind of ironical because if they weren't there at all, how could you say they weren't there? If you know what I mean. In one sense, they're not there. So what are they? You can't say what they are. But we know it anyway, in this mysterious way. And that's really when you're getting to that area, that's what we're talking about when it says you give free from the Mandala. They trot it out. Oh yes, of course, you give free from the Mandala. It's a very, very deep realization. Nonetheless, I think it's important to realise that when you realise emptiness, then you will realise the power of your generosity, your capacity to influence and help the world through your generosity, at the same time as not departing from your realisation of emptiness, which is astonishing, isn't it? And when you've realised emptiness, you won't have to think about emptiness anymore. There'll just be the generosity. And you won't have to think about that anymore, because they say it does itself, which would be great fun, wouldn't it? Would be great fun. Well, it's probably happening already, but we don't believe it. So we're worrying a lot unnecessarily about our generosity. If we could relax more, then our generosity would be naturally more. So how do you relax more? That's the question. And it's through, interestingly, it's through deeper, more profound insight into emptiness, which you might not immediately associate insight into emptiness with more relaxation, because it sounds like something that's very difficult to understand and therefore kind of needs the opposite. So it's tricky, isn't it? It's very tricky. We need help. We need help all along the way with this. So that was the first one. Free from the Mandala will increase your generosity. The next one is called discriminating awareness. I'm not sure what that is in Tibetan, but it's rather interesting. It's kind of the same again, really, but it's including your intention to establish all beings in enlightenment as the impulse behind your generosity. So the impulse behind the generosity is to free all beings from samsara, bring them to enlightenment. In the course of doing the generosity, it's free from attachment. You could understand that on a quite ordinary level of you give with no strings attached, which, I think that's important element. Also, you're not, but I think it's really at this stage it's referring to you have no attachment to what you're offering or you're giving as being real, in the sense that it's not real. So you're not clinging to you recognize it as being empty. So there's no attachment to it. But it works even on an ordinary level, to give without attachment, to give with a good motivation, to give without attachment, and then to give without any expectation. You're giving, simply giving, which I always find rather contradictory when I'm reading these Lamrim type teachings, because on the one side they seem to be trying to motivate you by fear of being born in the hungry ghost realms, and out of a fear of poverty and wishing to have riches, and emphasizing that you need wealth or resources if you're going to benefit others, so therefore you need to practice generosity to have resources in order to help others. So right, and then it says give without expectation in order to increase it. So there's you're looking at it from two different perspectives. From our point of view, it's like it'll work even though we have this expectation of some result. But if we actually reach the understanding of emptiness and realise it's all illusion anyway, so therefore there's nothing to worry about the results, it increases it even more. But it's really not a problem to start off with, to think you will get a good return, a good result from your generosity. It's just you can increase it by this deepening understanding of emptiness. So that's a good thing about generosity. You can practice it at any level, can't you? I mean, you can practice a bit of emptiness at all levels, but not so clearly as you can practice generosity. So, yes, at an ordinary level, to give without expectation is to give, really give, and it's not a deal. I'm not giving so that you will do something for me or you will respond in a certain way, or, I'm giving and there's no deal, no strings attached, which is very beautiful, isn't it? If we can ever do that. Yeah. So, it looks like that's filled up the whole hour. But I was left with quite a few questions myself that I expect you'll probably now ask me if I give you any time. Does anybody want to ask anything? I've run over a bit. Have I run over?
No, it's fine.
Oh, so questions, if you'd like to ask some questions.
You mentioned 3 things that Gampopa said. Did you tell us 3?
Intention before, no attachment while doing it, and no expectation after you've finished. Yeah.
Thank you.
Who's there?
Well, apart from Sally and Julie, they're all on YouTube, so I don't know who it is.
Alright.
I've sort of got a question.
Mm-hmm.
Recognising how difficult it can be to let go of that expectation of something in return. And then noticing, say, the tendency that if you notice that, you could turn that against yourself. Is there a place for practicing generosity with yourself in some kind of weird way, in accepting that that's natural and to encourage you to
I think
continue?
that's really what this thing of being generous in your attitude, seeing the good in others, it starts with seeing it in yourself, doesn't it? So recognising, actually, yes, I can see now there's something in me that's not completely right, but actually there's a lot that is good, isn't there? There's a lot that is good. So really recognising, so there's a lot, I've got a lot going for me, I've got a lot that is good. Then from that place, from that very generous place, you can see how you could actually go further. Does that make sense?
Actually, what I started thinking at that point was, it's at that point it then starts to get really difficult. Because I think this has come up on a previous teaching, actually, that to even dare to think that, there must be something quite, seems to kind of bring up even more of how could you think that sort of thing.
I think we do need to get over that. I think it's a cultural thing as much as anything.
Well, openness comes into my mind that at that point, if I remember openness, and there's a kind of a sense of letting go and starting out. It's almost like being able to let go of every thought, and that action
that helps better.
Feels more generous. That openness feels like a generous, like a loving kindness. That sort of thing. And then it's like I can get on with back to the beginning again.
So say that again.
Well, I don't know why, but the mandala's coming in my head. It's like there's it's easy to flip into a different mandala of self-criticism, and then if there can be an attraction to that.
Oh, really? Right.
Yeah, there's a familiarity. Then you can go into what's the point? You know,
right.
So remembering, balancing that with openness seems to be like the gateway out of that mandala again.
That sounds important.
And all of that feels to me like a really generous.
Well, that sounds really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really important.
I haven't thought about it before as being generosity. Really.
Right. I think it definitely is generosity, isn't it? Definitely. Especially if you then feel you can give. Yeah.
And then you touch on the wonderfulness
of that.
It's like,
yeah. It's all right after all. And I comfort myself. Well, the Buddha will have accepted it anyway. I for some reason I find that really comforting.
I'm still right at the beginning with that one.
Right. Imperfect though it was, the Buddha will have taken advantage, or the universe will have taken advantage, because it wants me to open like that. Even if it's imperfect, it will take advantage of that. So go for it, even if it's not perfect. Yeah.
Well, would you say that generosity is actually the energy of the universe as well? It's how universe operates.
It is. I would say that, yeah. I would say that.
So
but
anything that is like unlimited, there's no limit to it.
There's no limit to it.
Yeah.
But there just is this strange twist that can happen where it isn't able to actually immediately produce the happiness that it would naturally produce, because there's something fighting back from this deluded point of view. And I try to maintain some kind of non-reality. And we fight hard. Strange. It's all very strange, isn't it? Strange.
Can I ask you one more thing about fear? Can fear only exist? Can it exist if we're fully in the present moment? Can fear exist then?
I think if by being fully in the present moment, it's really is beyond all concepts. It's really not in time. If it's really not in time, there can be no fear. That's right. That's real emptiness.
Because normally we will scan a mind for reason why to be in fear. Because this and this happened in the past, and I should feel fear. So really it can't
or even just simply not recognizing that the splendor of what's appearing is actually not separate and therefore no threat. But if you distance yourself, thinking, "Oh, there's me," like that in Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, where Trungpa Rinpoche describes the grain of sand, doesn't he? There's this wonderful display going on, and then this grain of sand thinks, "Oh, what's all that? Oh, I'm separate." And then this fear develops from that. But before that, there was no fear. And in the Heart Sutra, it says, the Bodhisattvas, they have no fear, because there is no confusion, no delusion, is it? No.
Obscuration.
There's no obscuration, that's right. Therefore, there's no fear. That's right. Apparently, when Riggs and Schipa first heard the Heart Sutra, that was the part of it that really sent tingles down his, with his hair on, and they have no fear. They have that. They realise that, and they have no fear. Wow. Yeah.
You talked earlier about wise judgment with generosity, and it sounds like a path of practice rather than one could just sort of
exactly. Exactly.
Don't know quite how to proceed.
Yeah, no, it's something that has always puzzled me around. How do you make those judgments? And I think it really helps to think in terms of Mandala principle. You think, because as you say, oh, generosity, right, well, here's my stuff, here, bang.
That's done that. Next.
So I think it's good to have that general attitude. Okay, well, it's here for me to use to do what I need to do to help, my personal mandala, my world. So these are my resources I've been given to work with, and they're for me to give. So now I have to decide when and how to give them. And it's not necessarily going to be very helpful to just dump them on the world. In fact, I think, what was it that Kampopa said something about? Oh, yes, he says, not to give away things that then people around you would start crying. You can imagine, somebody giving someone's teddy bear to another child. You shouldn't. Even if it's your own, you shouldn't give it away if it will make someone else cry, which I thought was interesting. He also says you shouldn't give away your children and your wife and all that. And I think that's really interesting because, of course, there's this very famous story of a Santara who gives away his whole kingdom. He gives away his children and his wife and everybody, and they do operas of this. It's one of the most popular, stories that are dramatized in I think not just in Tibetan Buddhism. I think in Pali as well. There's this wonderful sense of, wow, he can even give away his children. He can even give away his dear, dear, most beloved wife. What generosity is that? And yet Gampopa says, I don't think you should do that unless you have their permission. I agree. So I think also the idea that somehow, using it with good judgment. And he says, practice generosity again and again and again. Well, that implies you keep some to practice, continue practicing with. It does also say if you have a lot, you should give a lot. You should give according to what you have, so that which of course the other way around would be if you have very little, just give what you have. And then there's the example of giving the blade of grass, isn't there? Where does that come up? I think it's in the Bodhisattva vow part. If you only have a blade of grass, then give a blade of grass. But don't give a blade of grass if actually you've got, you could give much more, which I think is a really interesting principle as well. What kind of... You can't get out of having to use your judgment, really, can you? I mean, everything you do in life, just how much salt you put in your food and, how much you eat. I mean, all the time you're having to judge what's the right amount, aren't you? So we could do that. And there can be different ways of going about it, couldn't there? You could have people had different policies. And they would all work together because some people had kept some back and some people had spent it. And then when later on, then those people who kept it back would have it. And those ones. So it's helpful if everybody has different policies. If some people keep a household, then they've got they've got the wherewithal to support people who haven't got a household. So, it all works together. And I guess social conventions are very important around that as well.
Gampopa says don't give something away if it makes someone cry.
Yes.
But aren't we aiming to go beyond attachment to things? So I'm thinking about giving things away that I'm finding difficult to give away. It's quite useful to stretch it a bit.
It is good. I mean, it's very difficult. It's a very short, he's just put headings there, perhaps topics for discussion. And certainly I think that's true, that if you are attached to something, it is good to give it away, as long as you can do it without regret. Yeah. I could give it that extra little push, kind of see somebody receive it and be pleased. At least they were pleased. But then you really attach to it, you give it away, and then they just leave it around and it doesn't mean anything to them. Oh, it's very difficult, isn't it? But then again, maybe that wasn't a very skillfully given gift because you didn't check whether it would be properly received or not. So there's lots of nuances to it, I think. Right. We dedicate this punya to the enlightenment of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings realize complete and perfect awakening. May the heart's awareness awaken in the unawakened. Where it has begun to stir, may it never fade, and may it awaken fully.